Flashback.
Oh, here we are. New year, new beginnings, and a shit ton of new Star Wars shows on the horizon that I couldn't be less interested in if I tried. I'm probably not going to make any videos about Mando Season 3 or Bad Batch Season 2 when they come out because I've already reviewed previous seasons of those shows and don't intend to repeat myself.
End of Flashback.
Well, would you look at that? It's my own words coming back to contradict me yet again. In fairness, I probably wouldn't have made a video about this show were it not for this one specific comment asking me to elaborate on my points, so that was very helpful advice. In the future, I'll try to remember to actually explain myself when I give a take. Good catch! The season was so bad that it deserves a long-form video akin to my Kenobi breakdown, but the dilemma here is that it doesn't deserve the effort, so what to do? Well, I'll give a semi-in-depth analysis here, but if you want a more thorough and extensive breakdown, you're in luck. It just so happens that I've done like 3 live streams with the Jolly Chap and Southpaw where we did exactly that, and they're each very long, and they'll all be linked down below. I'm sure you'll have a jolly good time. There's a bunch of people dining at a table. At the head of the table are Jack Black and Lizzo, whose names I refuse to learn. I'm just going to call them Jack Black and Lizzo throughout this.
I remember his name only because of the beer advert in the UK that shared the name. I don't remember Lizzo's character's name. I was like, there used to be an advert.
Does Lizzo's character literally not have a name?
What? Hold on. I'm looking this up now. Lizzo's Star Wars Mandalorian name.
No, she's just the Duchess. That's just her name.
No way. Whoa. That could actually just be Lizzo. That's Duchess Lizzo.
Duchess Lizzo.
Oh my god.
Anyway, I suppose there's no better place to start than right at the beginning, so we start off in some sort of freezer being run by these dog alien things, and then the Mandalorian emerges through the doorway. And what, hang on, sorry, what? Okay, so I've just been informed that I started us out on the wrong show. Apparently this is an episode of the Book of Boba Fett. I'm so sorry. So I guess we'll just fast forward until we're back to the right show. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, wow, we're skipping a lot. Guys, are we sure? There's a lot of really important stuff happening here. Oh, we're starting here. All right then. So just to recap all the stuff we skipped over, Grogu went off to train as a Jedi, but decided nah, and then got sent back to Mando on Tatooine. Mando became an apostate, got a new ship that's not a Razor Crest and doesn't serve his functionary needs, and of course, Peli Motto started dating the Twi'lek Majordomo.
Nice head tails.
Not that you needed me to tell you any of that, since the recaps tell you pretty much everything you missed, and in case you skipped that, they go ahead and tell you again in the subsequent scenes of the first episode, so from the standpoint of having subjected yourself to both of these hot piles of garbage, you get to sit there and watch the same exact information be delivered 3 different times, and it's about as redundant and frustrating as it sounds. Now, I'm not going to go through every episode scene by scene, because again, that would take way more effort than this show deserves, but the point of that bit was to emphasize just how much plot development happened for these characters between seasons on an entirely different show, which doesn't bode well going into season 3. And it's even worse when you realize that every significant piece of development that happened in the finale of season 2 is completely undone by the time this season ends. Grogu is back with Din, Moff Gideon escaped captivity off screen, and the conflict set up between Din and Bo-Katan regarding the Darksaber ended with Din just giving her the Darksaber, which is exactly what he was trying to do at the end of season 2, but she wouldn't let him. Well, okay, in the spirit of not misrepresenting the show, that's not exactly what happens, but what actually does happen is so much worse. She literally earns it on a technicality that completely destroys any chance the rules of the Darksaber ever had of making sense. Allow me, if you will, to lay it all out to you from the beginning. In the Clone Wars, Darth Maul challenged Pre Vizsla to single combat, and whosoever came out the victor would become the ruler of Mandalore. Now, most people forget this, but technically being ruler of Mandalore didn't actually have anything to do with possessing the Darksaber originally. That was something added in by Rebels. The only reason Maul kept it after he killed Vizsla was because it looked cool. That's about it.
I claim this sword
and my rightful place as leader.
But regardless, it seemed like the actual parameters for what constituted winning and becoming ruler of Mandalore were that you actually needed to defeat and kill your opponent, and that it had to be done in ritual combat. It couldn't simply be two opponents going toe-to-toe, because if that's all it took, then technically Obi-Wan should have become ruler all the way back in Season 2. I mean, I'd definitely call this a defeat on Vizsla's part. He had to retreat behind his own men. But then the Mando Season 2 finale came along and changed the rules up a little bit. Din beat Moff Gideon in a fight, but it wasn't an official challenge, just a fight between two guys who wanted to kill each other, which means contrary to what I just laid out, it actually is acceptable as a victory even if it's not in ritual combat. And apparently you no longer have to kill your opponent either, which is actually why so many people found the conflict they were trying to generate between Din and Bo so weird, because apparently you don't have to kill your opponent to win the Darksaber, you just have to beat them, so any tension between these two characters was basically non-existent going into Season 3. So that said, we already weren't off to a great start, but it became even worse when they changed the rules again. So in Episode 2, Din is exploring Mandalore because he's trying to redeem himself, which can only be done in the living waters underneath the mines of Mandalore. Previously thought destroyed during the Purge, but as we find out, Mandalore was actually inhabitable the entire time, and the Empire was just being a bit silly when they said it wasn't. Yeah, go figure, the Empire lied to you. Why the fuck did you all just believe them? Anyway, while he's down there, he gets caught in a trap set by this weird spider droid thing, and it hooks him up to this device that starts draining his blood. But thankfully, Grogu is able to escape the mines, take the ship, and fly all the way over to where Bo-Katan is hanging out so that she can come to Mandalore and save Din's life. In the process, she picks up the Darksaber and slays the creature that captured Din. In Episode 6, when they finally go to confront the Mandalorians, Din references this as Bo having apparently defeated the enemy that defeated him, thereby making her the rightful owner of the saber. And all the other Mandalorians accept this loophole, including Bo-Katan, who, need I remind you, was adamant about earning the Darksaber the right way this time, since the last time she had it, she led her people to ruin, and they blamed her for having accepted it as a gift rather than winning it in combat. So now the rules are, it doesn't have to be in ritual combat, or even general combat. Both parties don't even have to be aware of the fact that a challenge has been initiated. As long as the current owner is defeated, in the vaguest possible sense of the term, this counts as winning the Darksaber, which you might think defeats the whole purpose and opens up a plethora of issues, and you'd be right. Like, I assume that the reason this tradition was started in the first place was so that the current ruler of Mandalore would always be whoever's the strongest warrior. Should someone else come along who's better than them in combat, then the saber would go to them, and that's the Mandalorian way. It's kind of like the Sith rule of two in that respect. Sure, the apprentice could sneak attack their master when they least expect it, rather than challenge them to an official duel to determine who's the more powerful, but that would be counterintuitive to the entire point of the rule to begin with. Now, with the Mandalorians, anyone could just shoot their leader in the back when it's least expected, and suddenly they have a rightful claim to the throne. It's almost like the very concept of the Darksaber and what it represents to Mandalore as a whole in terms of traditions that ultimately serve as a detriment to their people is something that easily could have been explored as a theme this season, and you'd be forgiven for assuming that's where the story was going, considering everything that was set up for it going in, but that is in fact not what we got. That's even a whole aspect of what we'll be generously describing as Bo's character arc this season, but it's never developed in a meaningful way. Like, after she gets the Darksaber and becomes the ruler, all the Mandalorians get together and decide to go back to Mandalore, and she keeps going on about how the reason their people keep suffering and losing is because they're constantly at each other's throats and can't ever just unite as one people, because each sect is firmly rooted in their own ways and traditions. And you might be hearing all this and assuming that she's going to use her status as ruler to try and change things, heralding a new era of unity between the Mandalorians by doing away with traditions that keep setting them back and getting them killed. And in fact, there's a scene in Episode 7 that would have showcased this perfectly, but instead, the way it actually plays out is thematically confused and goes against everything Bo keeps preaching. So, the basic premise here is that she's brought together her old faction and the Children of the Watch, and obviously the two don't really like each other, because they have different beliefs about basically everything. The only thing keeping them together is the fact that they all work for Bo-Katan, but inevitably the tension between these two sides is going to boil into some kind of fight. Which is exactly what happens when Paz Vizsla and Axe Woves are playing chess, and Paz tries to do a move that isn't allowed, which causes a fight to break out. Din asks Bo if he should step in, but she tells him not to, because apparently neither side can step in. You just have to let the fight play out, I guess, because that's tradition, even though you'd assume that the reason this scene exists narratively would be to establish firmly that Bo-Katan isn't interested in letting her people fall into the same trap that's caused their downfall for these thousands of years, so she'd want to jump in and stop the fight, traditions be damned, but I guess not. How exactly do you intend to effect change if you can't even do anything to stop your own men from trying to kill each other? What's the point of any of this? And why did she let Baby Yoda step in? He gets in the middle of them with his IG mech suit, which, trust me, we're gonna get to, and just says no a bunch of times until they back off. And Bo-Katan is proud of him? But if he could do that, why the fuck didn't you do anything? He's not some impartial third party. He's a foundling in the Watch. I thought neither side could step in. You notice this a lot with Filoni Favreau writing, where you'll see something happen that conflicts wildly with the entire point of an episode or a character or the themes being presented, and you're just left confused with what you're supposed to take away from it. But I don't think there's a better example than this scene. It literally made no sense and contributed nothing to the story. All the Mandalorians just move on like it didn't even happen. In the process of them taking on the Empire, the Darksaber is destroyed by Moff Gideon, and again, I wish that this season had done the legwork necessary to establish why this needed to happen narratively, because I was definitely happy to see it go, but the show never bothered to convey why the Darksaber is representative of the old ways of Mandalore and why it needed to die. Half the Mandalorians who followed Bo to Mandalore only did so because she finally had possession of the Darksaber. They literally abandoned her between seasons because she didn't have it. But after it's broken, none of them apparently decide not to follow her anymore, so... okay. Like, they couldn't even be bothered to write a scene where the Mandalorians recognize that the sword is gone and choose to serve her anyway because she's proven herself to be a worthy leader. This is literally just skipped over entirely. The Darksaber as a narrative device was abysmally underutilized and ultimately pointless, and in more ways than just one, because it also could have served another character's story and completely fumbled in that regard as well. The character in question being Din Djarin, you know, the supposed main character of this show. You guys might have forgotten this, but like, he was the owner of the Darksaber for a time, for whatever that ended up being worth. It didn't accomplish anything narratively, and it did nothing for him in terms of character. Like, they set up in the Book of Boba Fett and carried into this show that he struggled to wield the saber because he was resisting it, which made it really heavy for some reason. And this was never really a thing before, so I assume they were going with a psychological angle here. And I could really see you going either direction with that. Either he learns to stop resisting the will of the saber and accepts his status as the rightful ruler of Mandalore, rounding out his arc and cementing the blade as his Excalibur, or you have Din realize that the blade was never meant for him because he's not fit to be a leader. And you have him go on an arc where he wants the throne but ultimately realizes that Bo was always the better pick, eventually challenging her to combat and losing to her. Either one of these could have worked, but the show made the bold choice of doing absolutely nothing with it instead. As a result, Din was basically a glorified placeholder for the saber while Bo-Katan got her shit together, which is an element that wasn't even established until this season in order to generate tension between these characters that just wasn't there, and to push her along an arc that made no sense and can only generously be described as thin. But I don't know why I was expecting them to do anything with Din's character, since they never do. He's just a blank canvas on which to project your own personality so that you can traverse the Star Wars universe through his eyes. I mean, there are audience POV characters, and then there's whatever the hell he is. What was even the point of making him an apostate and sending him on a quest for redemption? What does this religion mean to him? What were the consequences of no longer being considered one of them? He got to keep the cool and expensive armor, he got to keep the jetpack, which was something he had to earn, if you'll recall.
Gotta get one of those.
And he got to keep the foundling. I'm just saying it might have gone a long way in actually conveying to the audience that anything was different by having him walk around without the armor for a few episodes while searching for redemption. Give this character a chance to remember what it was like when he wasn't bulletproof as he continues to go on bounties to put food on the table. Maybe give Pedro Pascal an opportunity to show his face and actually act. Though I know that was off the table because he never even bothered to show up on set this entire season. He was too busy with The Last of Us. I get the feeling that the same reason Mando wasn't allowed to be without his armor for even one episode was the same reason Obi-Wan always wore his Jedi robes and carried around his lightsaber in Kenobi. It was just too marketable not to let those characters walk around in anything other than the attire that they're iconic for. And if you're reminding me of the Kenobi series, you're doing something wrong. In fact, there are a few different times that the show reminds me of Kenobi, like when you have characters make baseless inferences without any information to back up their claims, and then somehow, against all odds, they turn out to be right. But anyway, Din's status as an apostate is relevant for all of 2 episodes before he gets to Mandalore, bathes in the waters, and redeems himself. Kinda seems like we were building an entire arc that would carry throughout the whole season, but I guess we're done with that, so It's great. And I mean, with that, we're officially back to the status quo, aren't we? Grogu's back with Din, Gideon's out of prison, and Mando is now part of the Watch as if nothing ever happened. There's so much to say about the children of the Watch, and I honestly find it bizarre how this show just doesn't seem to recognize what these people are and what they should mean for Din's character. Like, I naively assumed that we were setting up an arc with him where he would realize that they've been gaslighting and manipulating him his entire life, and he might finally manage to break free of their indoctrination. But not only is this not addressed at all, but the show doubles down in painting them as a good thing, and it truly baffles me. This is a religion, no, not a religion, a cult, that is built on manipulating its followers for the sake of controlling them. The way isn't really all that well defined to begin with, but we know that they believe in a magic system that isn't real, and so all the rules that they've placed upon that foundation are just as much a sham as the religion itself. Rules that I might add include restricting basic freedoms and which force members to never truly be able to embrace the people that they love in a significantly important and human way. And if you go against these arbitrary rules, if you take your helmet off in order to save the people that you care about, or even to save your own life, you're seen as impure and told that you must find redemption. And what's worse, there's literally no way to redeem yourselves anymore as far as these people know.
I beg you for your forgiveness. How can I atone?
According to Creed, one may only be redeemed in the living waters beneath the mines of Mandalore.
But the mines have all been destroyed.
This is the way.
So by telling Din that he was wrong for removing his helmet to find Grogu, you're telling him that he's tarnished his very soul with no chance of ever possibly cleansing it. Anyone in the writer's room who might have actually given a shit would have seen this and understood that these are not the people you want your main character looking up to and trying to become a member of. This is the religion that you have your heroes start out in before they gain actual perspective and experience and realize that there's more to life than the limiting ways of his bullshit creed that doesn't even really mean anything. But instead we've spent 3 seasons with these guys, and we still barely know anything about them, or the way, or why this way is worth sacrificing your entire life to follow. I'm so fucking tired of hearing this is the way. I'm tired of hearing those words be treated triumphantly, as if it's not the slogan of a group of cultists who oppress their own followers and deny them basic decencies. They're not even allowed to fucking eat together. They have to go off and eat by themselves in the cold because they can't fucking take their helmets off in front of each other. But no, this is the way, guys. This is the way. This is the fucking way. And I guess while we're on the subject of Din not having a character, can we talk about the one episode that actually really pissed me off? Every other episode this season was either hilariously bad to the point where I actually enjoyed watching them, or they were so pathetically stupid that I just shook my head and sighed. But this one episode actively annoyed me as I was watching it, and one of the biggest contributing factors as to why is that it had a golden opportunity to develop one of the few traits that our main character actually has, and it did nothing with it. So before they can go talk to the Mandalorians in episode 6, Din and Bo-Katan have to go on a pointless side quest for Jack Black and Lizzo, where they investigate a bunch of malfunctioning droids in this bizarre Hunger Games society where the elite dominate the working class. And for some reason the show doesn't seem to recognize what they've actually created here. Like, they call themselves a direct democracy, yet they're apparently the elected leaders, which, you know, contradicts the very concept of a direct democracy. But that's not the point I'm trying to make here, so we can shelve that for now. The thing I want to highlight here is that Din has been characterized since literally the second scene of the entire series to have a strong distrust for droids. And we eventually learn that the reason for this is that his family was caught in a separatist attack when he was a child and his parents were killed by super battle droids. We get a shot from his point of view of a droid looming over him with its gun pointed at his face, which would be enough to instill a lifelong irrational hatred towards droids and just about anyone. Now, the show has never consistently upheld this trait.
Sorry, gang. Come on. You know he doesn't like droids.
May as well let them have at it. The crest needs a good once-over.
So he likes droids now.
But for this episode, they really are trying to remind us that he doesn't like droids. Throughout the episode, he's constantly talking about how droids can't be trusted and acting more aggressive than usual, but the show never really does anything beyond this very surface level stuff. His hatred for droids is never meaningfully reflected on or dived into, and by the end of the episode, you don't really get a sense that Din has grown as a character, which feels like such a wasted opportunity. There is literally a sequence where he and Bo are chasing down a super battle droid through the streets of this town, and they don't ever try to draw any kind of parallel between this and what happened to his parents. Like, what if we'd gotten a moment where the droid had him backed against a wall, and he could easily get out of this situation, but there's some psychological part of him that's causing him to freeze up, and then maybe Bo-Katan has to come in and save him. Then maybe we could have a scene later on where she asks him what happened back there, and he has to open up about his past and explain why he's been acting so aggressive. It's really jarring to have Din Djarin be asked to do a job dealing with malfunctioning droids, and his first and only reaction is,
You had me at battle droids.
as if he's excited about this, as if he wants to do this job, when by all accounts he should be telling Bo that this is a bad idea and that they can find another way to get to the Mandalorians. If Din were an actual character, we could be getting his perspective on things, but that's just not allowed, apparently. Speaking of which, the investigation concludes with them finding out that Christopher Lloyd's character was responsible for the malfunctioning droids because he's unhappy with the current ruler and their supposed direct democracy, and it turns out that he's a separatist who used to believe in Count Dooku. And people have pointed out that Bo-Katan might have had a thing or two to say about Dooku and this guy's perspective that he was some sort of visionary, which the show doesn't bother to explore, and I agree, they definitely wasted yet another opportunity with her here. But again, let's take the main character off the back burner for a second here. You have a guy telling him that the separatists were the true heroes of the galaxy and that they were right, and apparently Din, whose family was fucking murdered in a separatist attack, doesn't have anything to say in response, because perspectives are reserved for characters, and we just don't do that here. This is The Mandalorian. Characters? What are those? Politics? World building? Fuck off, nerd.
Politics.
Fuck you.
This reads like an episode of Scooby-Doo. It doesn't really have anything to do with the actual main plot. It's a very straightforward investigation that leads them to basically the only suspect that we've been introduced to. And then they bring him before the authorities and he gives his embittered speech about why he did what he did in a very clunky and ham-fisted way. Seriously, all we're missing is the, and I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you meddling kids and your dog. And then Lizzo's like, yeah, well, sorry you feel that way. And he just hangs his head in shame and fucks off. Like, seriously, this revolutionary who was willing to bring about societal collapse to achieve his goals gets a tap on the wrist and he's like, I'm sorry. And like, I touched on this a bit earlier, but the show doesn't really seem to recognize what it's actually established about the society, and it's fucking horrifying. Supposedly it's a culture built on droid labor so that the citizens don't have to work, and yet we meet plenty of characters who have jobs like Christopher Lloyd, which implies at least some level of class inequity that's just not even addressed. The episode only seems to recognize this when Chris is explaining his motivations, and it's framing him like he's the bad guy for wanting true democracy and equality among the citizens of this dystopian hellscape. And this is easily the most interesting scene in the entire episode, but we're not allowed to meaningfully explore the concept because politics bad. Fuck this show. Fuck this show. Fuck this fucking show. I mean, the world building in this show is generally pretty bad, and season 3 was definitely no exception. We talked a little bit about Mandalore and its culture already, but there's still a lot to say about the state of the galaxy and what people seem to know at a given time. Like, for some reason, Carson Teva thinks that the pirates attacking Navarro are in league with the Empire, and it turns out that he's actually correct, but he had no way of possibly deducing that with the information available to him, so it really feels like the writers injecting meta-knowledge to push the story forward and give him a reason to care about the conflict. We do find out that the pirates were sent by Moff Gideon, but we never actually learn why or how that factors into his larger goals. He just sort of did it to fuck with Carl Weathers, I guess. I mean, I personally thought it was really cool that there was a pirate king running around with what I assumed was a stolen Imperial fleet. It's a nice bit of world building, showing that in the wake of the Emperor's death, all sorts of factions and organizations swallowed up resources and territory and consolidated power and may have even posed a threat to the fledgling New Republic, but no. Turns out he was just working for Gideon. God, that's lame. Also, apparently the New Republic are so backed up with conflicts needing resolution on member worlds that they can't even spare anyone to help out on Navarro since it's not part of the Republic. But if that's the case, then why are they decommissioning their fleets? Both the Rebel fleet and the Imperial ships are being scrapped, which is something that I already took issue with just by itself, but evidently they're stretched completely thin with what they're currently dealing with, and yet they're needlessly throwing away resources? Yeah, I'm not entirely happy with the way they handle the New Republic Republic in this show. Even in the Dr. Pershing episode, which is the only one that I mostly like because it tried to actually tell a story and develop a character and flesh out the world, they still establish a lot of things that had me scratching my head. Are you telling me that a government led by Mon Mothma and Leia would allow the members of their Imperial Amnesty program to be referred to by numbers rather than names? Because I don't buy that for even a second. Why the hell would they allow a device like the Mind Flayer to even exist, even in a capacity that's meant to be of lower intensity? Seems like that's a device that could be heavily abused, and we even see exactly that when, for some reason, the Imperial lady who used to work for Moff Gideon was allowed to be left unattended with the prisoner and turn up the dial. Why does that setting even exist on this totally ethical piece of machinery if it's supposedly no longer meant for that purpose? Wouldn't you just get rid of that as even a possibility? And why the fuck is this person allowed so much freedom and authority? I don't know how she managed to get away with fucking with Pershing's mind, but I'm still more concerned with how she was allowed to be left alone in that room to begin with. Why was she the only one allowed to make a report on what happened? The New Republic officers apparently didn't try to get his side of the story. This woman was basically Gideon's right-hand man. Wouldn't she be under the most suspicion out of anyone else in this program? What the fuck is going on? And wait a minute, how did Gideon escape en route to his war tribunal without the New Republic knowing about it? Whoever was supposed to meet him at his destination would surely have reported him missing when he didn't show up. So I suppose you must be telling me that they know he escaped and have actively been working to cover it up? Fuck that shit. People have defended this by saying that we already knew where this republic was ultimately headed thanks to the sequels, and that is technically true, but that doesn't mean I have to be happy about it. I don't particularly love the way The Force Awakens handled the New Republic, but even then, at least I could infer that since it's been 30 years, the Senate became mired in corruption in the intervening decades between these trilogies. I still don't love that, since that would essentially mean the OT characters allowed the government to fall into the same missteps as the Republic of old, but there's really nothing you can do about that at this point. Still though, it's even worse here because it's only been 5 years since Return of the Jedi. Leia and Mothma are still in power, they're still leading this government, and you're telling me that not even a decade after the original trilogy, they'd already allowed the Republic to become essentially no better than the Empire? Way to solidify even further how much these characters failed in their life's work after working so hard to bring down the tyrannical government. Thanks for that. The show also tried to establish that the New Republic apparently thinks the Empire is basically gone, but I don't buy that either, since Ahsoka knows Thrawn is still around and has spoken with Luke as of learning that information. You'd imagine there are a few people in the Republic who know how much of a threat Thrawn is, since a lot of them were part of the rebellion when he almost wiped them out, but I guess we're meant to believe that either Ahsoka didn't tell Luke, Luke didn't tell his sister, or the powers that be decided it just wasn't that big a deal. That's the thing about this interconnected Mandoverse that they're trying to build. All it does is create more world-building problems rather than solve them. Like, why are there two X-Wings policing Tatooine when the New Republic barely have enough resources as is to spare for planets that are actually part of their government? I mean, I highly doubt that Tatooine is a member world, considering there was barely even an Imperial presence there when the Empire was at the height of its power. You may have forgotten this with the way Disney portrays this planet, but once upon a time, it wasn't seen as much more than a remote dust ball on the outskirts of the galaxy.
Well, if there's a bright center to the universe, you're on the planet that it's farthest from.
Another aspect of the world building that's not particularly done well is the concept of independent worlds like Navarro, an honest-to-God pirate republic that this show didn't bother to flesh out at all, but it was such an interesting concept. And you'd think with a character like Greef Karga, who used to be the leader of the Bounty Hunters Guild, would have a few other connections to contact if he needs a defense force. I don't know why this show is so hellbent on acting like the only characters these people know are the ones we've already met. Like, wouldn't it be neat if we actually got to see different systems represented in this faction Karga is trying to build? Maybe different independent worlds coming together for trade and commerce, and to generally swap resources in terms of armed forces in case they're attacked by pirates. What would the New Republic have to say about a group of worlds trying to keep an independent stance while they build their government, considering the last time that happened a galactic war broke out and basically split the galaxy in two? There's a lot of interesting things you could explore with this, but nah, we gotta watch these chuckle fucks stick around and eventually decide to reclaim Mandalore. And I guess while we're on the subject of Navarro, now's about as good a time as any to talk about IG-11. So, in the first episode, Mando's gonna go back to Mandalore to take a bath, and he wants a droid that'll help him navigate the planet and make sure that it's not toxic. Of course, this is ignoring the fact that ships can simply do that from space, or from within atmosphere at the very least, and the fact that probe droids exist for that express purpose. But since we're pretending to care about Din's distrust for droids in this particular episode, he wants IG-11 specifically. As he puts it,
I need a droid I can trust to help me explore Mandalore. And he's that droid.
Apparently, they built a statue in IG's honor, which sits neatly at the center of town square. Not really sure why the statue doesn't recognize Queel, who also died saving this planet, or really any of the characters who fought to liberate it from the Empire. Yes, that includes Cara Dune. But what's even better is the fact that apparently the statue itself is partially built out of IG's own parts.
These are his parts, are they not?
I mean, what's left of him?
Specifically, the upper half of his body is what's apparently meant to be what they were able to salvage, which I call bullshit on, considering he exploded from a bomb in his chest in a pool of lava. They actually chose to show this in the episode's recap, which is just funny. And does anyone remember the reason that IG was able to explode in the first place? He had a built-in self-destruct system that he would initiate in the event that the information he carried was at risk of falling into enemy hands, so that there'd be nothing left to recover should he be captured.
Manufacturer's protocol dictates I cannot be captured. I must self-destruct.
His explosion was designed with the specific intent that he not be salvageable, which means that if this show is trying to even pretend that it's possible to recover any version of his brain, I'm simply not going to believe them. So naturally, they take him up to Grief's office and literally zap him one time and he jumpstarts. I guess nobody ever thought to try that. But oh no, he apparently defaulted back to his original programming, so he tries to kill Baby Yoda. He starts crawling around the room Terminator style, but he's stopped by a bust being dropped on his head, thereby completely destroying whatever version of his brain might still exist. Now, this episode and episode 6 make me wonder if Din has even a basic understanding of how robots work, and for that matter, if the writers do. Because now that we've had this happen, you'd think Din would understand that droids, being programmable machines and all, are only trustworthy if they're programmed to be. There's even a line in season 1 where Queel tells him this, but I guess he wasn't listening.
Droids are not good or bad. They are neutral reflections of those who imprint them.
Now that IG has defaulted back to wanting to kill Grogu, not only is he someone you can no longer trust, but he is, in fact, the one droid in the entire galaxy that specifically wants your son dead. And again, we just crushed his brain beyond repair, so there's not even anything left to fix. But regardless, he takes him to a bunch of Babu Fricks, and they tell him to find another memory drive to replace this one, which would effectively erase IG completely and turn him into a different droid for all intents and purposes. Essentially, what I'm saying here is that buying a new droid would achieve the same results and would be a lot easier for him, but Din doesn't know how basic technology works, so he decides to go find a new memory for him. This is when he goes to Tatooine and meets up with everyone's favorite character, and within 5 minutes of this scene beginning, she's already managed to convince him to buy R5 and use him instead, rendering the plot of the entire previous episode completely moot. I have no idea if Jon Favreau has dementia, but I'm starting to think he doesn't actually give a shit about what he's writing. Just a silly little theory I'm playing around with. But fear not, dear viewers, that is not the last time we see IG-11. I already mentioned this earlier briefly, but he's brought back in the second to last episode as IG-12, and what they choose to do with him is really bizarre and just in poor taste. So now he's basically a vehicle that the Babu Fricks have turned into a mech suit for Baby Yoda to ride around in, and for some reason Grogu is thrilled by the prospect of riding around in the corpse of his dead friend. Like, I know he's a droid, but this show has muddied the waters so hard in terms of droid sentience, and it feels disgusting watching Grogu ride around in his friend's skin suit. The only person who's not okay with this is Din, but it seems to be more because he doesn't like putting Grogu in danger, which is actually laughable considering all the dangerous missions he keeps bringing him on, including in this same episode, by the way. But regardless, it doesn't matter what he thinks either, because Grogu wants it and Karga encourages it, and Din is a plank of wood with no agency of his own who gets pushed around and taken advantage of by every character on this show. So yay, Baby Yoda gets to keep the mech suit, woohoo! Also, I guess we're really committing to the fact that Grogu can fully understand everything that's being said to him at all times. The show always tried to be pretty vague about that up until this point, but here he and Din are genuinely having an argument back and forth.
Maybe when he's older.
No.
What do you mean, no?
No.
I think he's saying he's old enough to operate it.
Yes.
So, I guess now we know. Makes you wonder why he still can't speak if he understands words like yes and no and can comprehend the things that Mando's saying, but whatever, he's cute. IG-12 eventually gets taken down in the finale, but then, right at the last minute, Din just happens to find an IG head sitting around on a New Republic base, even though they're supposed to be super rare, and I guess he extracted the memory chip from that and put it in the other one, or I don't know, something like that. Whatever the case, he then presents the newly reborn IG-11 to Grief Karga as the official Marshal of Navarro.
Greetings, citizens. I am IG-11, your new marshal.
No one's ever really gone.
I still question why these people think that this planet can be defended by one marshal. I don't care how capable this droid is, this is a fucking planet. At least with Cobb Vanth, all he was defending was one small town, and even then all it took was one guy to bring him down. This planet needs an entire defense force, and I seriously don't understand why Karga apparently doesn't have contacts that can help him with that. Especially considering we know there are independent systems hiring mercenary forces as private armies right now. But of course, the bigger takeaway here is that IG is back, I guess? Or maybe not, since we already went over that the way robots work should mean that this guy is a new entity, but again, Jon Favreau has no fucking idea what droids are, apparently. So who knows, maybe he really is the same droid that we knew from Season 1, with all of his memories intact. You might as well at this point, continuity stopped mattering so long ago, and don't even get me started on meaningful stakes and lasting consequences. Something frustrating impermanence, or whatever, I don't care. And not to forget about Grogu, because we still haven't really talked about him. I just want to say that I've become so fucking tired of this character, and after spending an entire season watching him do fuck all, I don't think we've justified putting him back with Din at all. This show completely undid their separation, despite that being a fine end to their journey together, so that he could continue being the face of the show and selling a boatload of toys, and the novelty of a cute little baby Yoda creature wore off so long ago. At this point, I relate closely to that one scout trooper that punched this little shit in the face. Sometimes I watch this clip on loop as a form of catharsis. I love how when Brindle Hux and the Praetorian Guard showed up, everyone on Twitter was like, hell yeah, sequel fans stay winning. Like, I wonder how they must have felt watching 3 Praetorian Guards fail to kill a fucking baby flipping around the room, laughing at them like it's no biggie. I don't even give a shit that he has the Force. That's not supposed to matter. Why did this show insist on making them even lamer than they already were? But yeah, guys, sequel fans stay winning, right? I can't fucking believe how much of a joke Moff Gideon was this season. I can't believe I saw Giancarlo Esposito show up and felt absolutely nothing while he did his thing. I can't believe that after 3 seasons of hyping up his endgame, we find out that he just wanted to clone himself with Force powers and make an army of Beskar-wearing stormtroopers. When he showed up decked out in his Beskar super armor, it took everything in me not to bust out laughing because my neighbors were asleep. He looks so fucking goofy, and his motivations are so lame. Come on. Everything about this finale is lame. The clones are lame and then they die. The Beskar troopers are lame and then they die. And it's weird since they're supposed to be wearing Beskar armor, which is shown to be impervious to blaster fire and even lightsabers. But these fuckers get shot down and cut through with a darksaber like it's nothing. Beskar is so inconsistently applied in these episodes that it becomes worthless as a word. Like, I remember when the Praetorian Guards killed Paz and everyone was like, oh shit, they have weapons that can pierce through Beskar. And then in the next episode, those same weapons bounced off Din's armor like they were nothing. And then Moff Gideon dies in an explosion, maybe, and Grogu pushes back the flames and everything's fine. The end. This season quite appropriately went out with a sizzle rather than a bang, and I think a lot of people are finally starting to notice that this show really isn't as good as they thought it was. I've tried to refrain from bringing up Andor at all in this review, because that's the easy thing to do when talking about pretty much anything Disney Star Wars, but ever since that show came out, I think general audiences' standards for what a Star Wars show can be were significantly raised, and that's a good thing. It means Disney isn't going to be able to keep producing mediocre shit unquestioned for much longer. I think they finally started to realize that if they don't get their shit together soon, they're not going to be able to sustain this formula of producing sludge after sludge for the masses to consume. Now, whether or not they'll learn the right lessons from Andor remains to be seen, and knowing Disney, probably not, but it's undeniable that they've had a huge wake-up call with how this new season of The Mandalorian has been received. They got pretty comfortable when they realized they didn't have to try, but that shit just ain't gonna cut it anymore. As for this absolute shit show of a series, I know they've apparently already drafted a 4th season and have no end in sight for these characters, and apparently this Mandoverse is all leading to some big crossover movie in like 7 years, but considering Lucasfilm's addiction to announcing projects and then immediately canceling them, I somehow doubt that'll ever see the light of day. With any luck, they're sitting down with John and co right now and telling them to actually fucking redraft their season 4 scripts, if not just canceling the season entirely, and I, for one, could not be happier about that. 1.5 out of 10, fuck this show, bye!